Get on your knees. Officer Daniel Reeves said it like it was nothing, like the words weighed less than the rain falling steadily around them, like they were just another routine command in a long night. Naomi Hayes stood on the curb outside St. Mary's Medical Center, her navy scrubs damp, clinging lightly to her skin, the faint sterile scent of antiseptic still lingering around her like a second uniform. 12 hours on her feet, lives touched, lives lost, and none of it mattered here. To him, she was already reduced to something simple. A problem. A body. A woman who hadn't obeyed fast enough. I did not do anything wrong, Naomi said, her voice quiet but steady, so steady it seemed to press against the silence forming around them. A city bus hissed at the corner, brakes exhaling like a tired sigh. A couple under a flickering deli sign paused mid-conversation. Somewhere, an engine idled too long, unnoticed. The entire street leaned toward the moment without taking a step. Reeves moved closer, rain darkening his boots, his jaw tight in a way that suggested control, but not the kind that came easily. That's not how this works, he said, clipped, irritated. Naomi didn't step back. Her body didn't flinch. If anything, it adjusted, subtle, grounded, balanced in a way that didn't belong to fear or defiance, but something quieter, something learned, something practiced. Not bravery. Control. Reeves noticed, and it unsettled him more than resistance would have. Last chance, he said, sharper now. Get on your knees. Naomi held his gaze, unblinking, the rain tracing slow paths down her temple, her cheek, her jaw. For a brief second, the world narrowed, not to the officer, not to the crowd, but to a memory. Her father's voice. Not loud. Never loud. The kind that didn't need to rise to be obeyed. The kind that lived in the spine, not the ears. When someone tries to put you beneath them, a breath. Don't help them by becoming small. Naomi inhaled, slow and measured, her shoulders staying relaxed, her posture unchanged. You don't have to do this, she said. Not a plea, not fear. Something else. A line drawn without movement. Reeves's expression hardened. For the smallest fraction of a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt, not doubt, something closer to being seen too clearly. Then it vanished, replaced by pride and something sharper. His hand moved before the moment could settle. Fast, clean. The sound of it wasn't loud, but it cut through the street like a crack in glass. Naomi's head turned slightly with the impact, just enough to acknowledge the force. Then it returned. No stumble, no cry, just breath. Even, present. Her hand rose slowly to her cheek, fingertips resting there not in shock, not in outrage, but with a strange calm, as if she were confirming the existence of something rather than reacting to it. Like pain was information. Reeves blinked, caught off guard. That wasn't the reaction he expected. Behind him, a phone screen lit up. Then another. A teenager near the bus stop lifted his device, elbows locking into place. A man in a gray hoodie shifted for a clearer angle. Across the street, someone stepped closer without realizing it. Another lens caught the moment. Then another. By the time Reeves turned slightly, registering the glow behind him, something had already changed. This wasn't his moment anymore. It belonged to everyone watching. Naomi lowered her hand, rain running down her face in thin lines, indistinguishable from anything else. You didn't have to do that, she said. No accusation. No raised voice. Just a simple truth that landed heavier than anger ever could. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't move, didn't reach for it, didn't even glance down. But for a split second, the light pressed faintly through the fabric of her scrubs, just enough to reveal a single word on the screen. Dad. The vibration stopped. She let it. Somewhere behind Reeves, a voice whispered, barely audible, "Why is she so calm?" He heard it, and for the first time since stepping out of his cruiser, something inside him shifted. Not control, not authority, something else. Uncertainty. Because the longer she stood there, unmoved, unbroken, the less this felt like a situation he could command. The rain came down harder, tapping against metal, glass, skin, turning the street into a surface that reflected everything back. Naomi remained still, not passive, not weak, present in a way that made the moment feel heavier, more real. There was no chaos to dominate, no anger to justify force, only stillness. And something inside that stillness felt trained. Somewhere far from that street, a phone began to ring again, persistent this time, cutting through a different kind of silence. And the man on the other end was not the kind of man who ignored calls from his daughter. The rain didn't ease after that. It settled in, steady, relentless, like the night itself had decided to stay and watch. Naomi stood exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her breathing even, the faint sting on her cheek already fading into something quieter, something filed away instead of reacted to. Across from her, Officer Reeves shifted his weight, just slightly, but enough to betray that something had slipped. Not authority, not yet, but certainty. Behind him, the glow of phone screens multiplied. What had been one witness was now several. What had been a moment was becoming a record. Put those away, Reeves snapped, louder than necessary, his voice cutting across the rain. No one moved. The teenager by the bus stop steadied his grip. The man in the gray hoodie adjusted his stance, angling for a clearer shot. A woman with a grocery bag tightened her hold on her daughter, but didn't look away. The command landed, and stayed there, unanswered. Naomi watched him, not with challenge, not with fear, but with a quiet attention that made him feel seen in a way he didn't like. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," Reeves said, though the words felt thin even to him. Naomi tilted her head slightly, rain slipping from her hairline to the corner of her mouth. "No," she said softly. "You already did that." The street seemed to absorb the sentence. Somewhere, a car door shut. Somewhere else, a voice whispered, too low to make out the words. Reeves rubbed the back of his neck, fingers dragging against damp skin, a gesture that felt instinctive and exposed at the same time. He glanced again at the phones, at the quiet persistence of lenses that didn't blink, didn't forget. His radio crackled faintly at his shoulder, a burst of static cutting through the tension. "Unit 14, status?" a voice asked, distant but clear. Reeves hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but long enough for Naomi to notice. Long enough for the hesitation to become part of the moment. "All good," he replied quickly, a little too quickly. "Routine stop." The word routine hung in the air like something misplaced. Naomi's phone buzzed again, this time longer, more insistent. She felt it against her hip, a steady vibration that seemed out of sync with the rhythm of the rain. She still didn't reach for it, but someone else noticed. The teenager filming zoomed slightly, the frame tightening. "Her phone's going off," he muttered, not meaning to be heard. Reeves heard it anyway. His eyes flicked down, just for a second, then back up to Naomi's face. "You want to answer that?" he asked, the edge in his voice returning, searching for ground. Naomi met his gaze. "No," she said. Simple. Final. Not defiant, just decided. Another crackle from the radio. Louder this time. "Unit 14, confirmed situation. We're getting calls." Reeves's jaw tightened. "What calls?" he snapped back, irritation creeping in. A pause on the other end. Then, multiple reports. "Possible excessive force. Location matches yours." The words landed heavier than the rain. For the first time, Reeves looked around, not at Naomi, but at the street. At the people. At the phones. At the reality forming outside of him. Naomi watched the shift happen in real time. Not dramatic. Not sudden. But there. The moment where control begins to loosen, thread by thread. "It's handled," Reeves said into the radio, but the conviction wasn't the same. Not anymore. A low murmur moved through the small crowd, subtle but growing. Someone stepped closer. Another voice, clearer now. He hit her. The words didn't need to be loud. They only needed to exist. Naomi felt the night pressing in, not against her, but around the moment, sealing it in place. She took a slow breath, the kind that grounded rather than calmed, and spoke again, her voice steady enough to cut through the noise without rising above it. "You still have a chance to walk away from this." Reeves stared at her. The sentence didn't sound like a threat. That was what made it worse. It sounded like truth. His radio crackled again, sharper now. "Unit 14, supervisor en route. Do not escalate." The word supervisor landed differently. Final. Official. Reeves exhaled through his nose, a controlled release that didn't quite hide the shift underneath. Somewhere beyond the edge of the scene, sirens flickered, distant, not rushing, but coming. Naomi's phone buzzed a third time. Longer. Persistent. This time, a faint glow slipped through the fabric again, enough for the camera to catch it, enough for someone watching live somewhere else to notice. The name on the screen didn't change. Dad. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second. Not in fear. Not in hesitation. Just a moment. Then she opened them again, steady as before. Across from her, Reeves straightened, as if posture alone could restore what had already begun to slip. But the street had changed. The balance had shifted. This was no longer a command. It was a situation. And somewhere far beyond the rain-soaked lights, in a place untouched by the noise of the city, a man stared down at a phone that had now rung 3 times. He didn't reach for it immediately, not because he ignored it, but because men like him didn't react without understanding first. The 4th ring never came, because before it could, he was already moving. The rain had turned the street into a mirror. Every flashing light, every movement, every hesitation reflected back with uncomfortable clarity. Naomi stood in the same place, her presence unchanged, but the world around her had begun to rearrange itself. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was watching. Officer Reeves felt it before he understood it. The shift. The way the air tightened. The way the crowd no longer looked like bystanders, but witnesses. His radio crackled again, sharper now, cutting through the rhythm of the rain. Unit 14, supervisor is 2 minutes out. Do not engage further. Stay where you are. The words landed like a command he couldn't override. Reeves exhaled slowly, trying to steady something that had already begun to slip. I said it's handled, he muttered under his breath, but he didn't press the radio this time. Because part of him knew it wasn't. Across from him, Naomi didn't move. Not a step forward, not a step back. Her stillness had changed meaning. It wasn't just composure anymore. It was pressure. The kind that didn't shout, but didn't leave either. A car slowed as it passed, the driver's head turning just enough to catch the scene. Another phone lifted. Another angle captured. Somewhere out there, beyond the glow of the streetlights, the moment had already begun to travel. That's her, a voice said suddenly from the edge of the small crowd. Not loud, but clear enough. Reeves turned slightly, eyes narrowing. A man in a dark jacket stepped forward just half a pace, uncertainty written across his face. I've seen her before, he added, glancing between Naomi and the officer. At the hospital. She's a nurse. Helped my kid last month. The statement landed differently than the others. Not accusation. Not outrage. Recognition. Human. Naomi didn't react. But the air did. The narrative, fragile as it was, shifted again. She wasn't just a body on a curb. She wasn't just resistance. She was someone known. Someone who had mattered to someone else. Reeves felt it, the way that detail undercut everything he had built in his head about this moment. Step back, he said, sharper now, though the command lacked the weight it had minutes ago. The man hesitated, then obeyed, but the damage was done. The story had changed. Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time longer. Insistent. The light pressed faintly through the fabric once more, caught briefly by one of the cameras still trained on her. Dad. The word lingered in the glow before fading again. A few feet away, the teenager filming frowned slightly, lowering his voice. She's not even reacting, he murmured. Like, she knows something. Reeves heard that too, and it irritated him more than anything else. Because it felt true. You think this is a game? He snapped, stepping forward again despite the instruction in his ear. Not close enough to touch, but closer than before. Naomi met his movement without mirroring it. No, she said. I think this is already over. The sentence didn't rise, didn't sharpen, but it landed with a finality that made something in Reeves's chest tighten. Over? He glanced around again. The phones, the faces, the quiet judgment forming in the space between them. The distant flicker of approaching lights. For the first time, the idea didn't sound absurd. Another voice cut in, louder now, from somewhere behind the growing line of onlookers. Hey, he hit her, man. That's not right. The murmur thickened. Not chaos. Not yet. But direction. The kind that didn't need organization to become force. Reeves straightened, instinctively reaching for control again, for something familiar. But his options had narrowed. His authority had boundaries now, visible ones. Measurable ones. Naomi watched it happen, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with clarity. This was how moments like this turned. Not all at once, but enough. Somewhere beyond the intersection, the low hum of an approaching vehicle grew louder. Not sirens. Not urgency. Just presence. Deliberate. The kind that didn't rush because it didn't need to. Reeves heard it too. his head turning slightly toward the sound. "Supervisor's here," someone whispered. But the tone carried something else. Something uncertain. Because the vehicle that rolled into view wasn't alone. One car became two, then three. Dark. Unmarked. Moving in quiet coordination that didn't belong to routine patrol. They slowed as they approached, tires whispering against wet pavement, engines low and controlled. The street seemed to hold its breath again, but this time, it wasn't just the crowd. Reeves felt it in his spine before he could name it. That instinct. The one that told you when something had just stepped into a space that outranked you without saying a word. Naomi didn't turn, didn't look, but something in her posture shifted, barely. Not tension, recognition. The first car came to a stop at the edge of the scene. Doors didn't slam. They opened. Quietly. One figure stepped out. Then another. No rush. No wasted motion. Just presence. The kind that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. Reeves's hand hovered near his radio again, but he didn't press it. Because, suddenly, the situation didn't feel like something a radio could fix. Naomi's phone buzzed one last time. She reached for it now. Not hurried. Not unsure. Just on time. The rain softened just enough to make the silence louder. Not quieter, louder. Every drop against metal, every faint shift of fabric, every breath seemed to carry further now, as if the street itself had leaned in to listen. Naomi stood still, her hand now loosely wrapped around her phone, the screen dark again, her posture unchanged, but the space around her had altered in a way no one could quite explain. Across from her, Officer Reeves felt it settle in his chest, slow and heavy. The instinct that had been tapping at him before was no longer subtle. It was present. The first of the black vehicles idled at the curb, engine low, controlled. No flashing lights. No sirens. Just quiet authority pressing into the moment. The second stopped behind it. Then the third. Doors opened. Not sharply, not with urgency, but with precision. Measured. Intentional. The kind of movement that didn't ask for attention but took it anyway. One man stepped out from the first vehicle. Then another from the second. Their shoes met wet pavement with soft, deliberate contact. No rush. No wasted motion. They weren't scanning the scene like officers looking for a threat. They were observing it like men who already understood one. Reeves straightened instinctively, his shoulders pulling back, his stance adjusting without conscious thought. Training. Reflex. But this wasn't a situation he recognized within his own chain of command. These men wore no uniforms. No badges visible. Nothing to identify them in the way he was used to. And yet, something about them carried more weight than every piece of metal on his chest. One of them walked forward slightly, stopping just short of the line where the crowd began. His gaze moved across the scene once, slow, precise, taking in the phones, the officer, the distance between them, and then it settled on Naomi. Not in surprise. Not in question. Recognition. Naomi met that gaze for half a second. Nothing more. But it was enough. Something passed there, silent, unspoken, understood. Reeves saw it, and something in his chest tightened. "This is a controlled scene," Reeves said quickly, his voice returning to form, sharper now, reaching for authority before it slipped any further. "Step back. I've got this handled." The words sounded right. Familiar. But they didn't land the same way. The man didn't move, didn't react, didn't even look at him immediately. Instead, he took one more step forward, just enough to enter the edge of the scene fully, and only then did his attention shift. His eyes met Reeves's, not aggressively, not challengingly, just directly. And that was worse. "Do you?" the man asked. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried in a way that cut through the rain without force. Reeves opened his mouth, ready to respond, to assert control again, but the words stalled. Because something about the question didn't feel rhetorical. It felt measured, like an assessment already underway. Behind Reeves, his radio crackled again, sharper, more urgent this time. "Unit 14, supervisor on site. Hold position." Repeat, "Hold position." Reeves didn't reach for it. His attention stayed locked forward, caught between protocol and something else he couldn't quite define. The man's gaze didn't waver. "Step away from her," he said. Not a command, not raised, but final in a way that left no room for interpretation. Reeves hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough for the crowd to feel it. Enough for the cameras to catch it. Enough for the balance to tilt. Naomi didn't move. didn't speak. But her presence had shifted again, not because she changed, but because everything else had. The roles were rearranging themselves around her. Reeves exhaled slowly, a tight, controlled breath, his jaw flexing as he held his ground half a second longer than he should have. Then, one step back. Small. Almost nothing. But irreversible. The man didn't acknowledge it. Didn't react. He simply moved past the line Reeves had just vacated, closing the distance toward Naomi with the same calm precision. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough to be heard without raising his voice, far enough to respect the space she held. For a moment, he didn't speak. His eyes flicked once to her cheek, the fading mark, the rain tracing over it, and then back to her eyes. "You okay?" he asked. The question was simple, but it carried something heavier underneath. Naomi nodded once. "I am." No elaboration. No emotion spilled over. Just truth. The man held her gaze for a second longer, then gave the smallest nod in return. Behind him, the other men had spread slightly, not aggressively, not forming a barrier, but enough to change the geometry of the space. Enough that Reeves was no longer at the center of it. Not even close. Somewhere in the distance, a siren finally rose, but it felt late now. Out of sync with what was already happening. Reeves stood still, the weight of the moment pressing in, the quiet realization forming whether he wanted it to or not. This was no longer his scene. It hadn't been for a while. He just hadn't recognized the exact moment it slipped away. Naomi's phone remained in her hand now, still silent, still dark. But she didn't put it away. She didn't need to. Because whatever call had been missed earlier had already been answered in another way. The rain carried on, steady and indifferent, but the street no longer felt the same. Something had shifted too far to return. Naomi stood where she was, phone resting quietly in her hand now, her posture unchanged, but everything around her had rearranged itself in response. The man who had stepped forward remained a few feet away from her, his presence calm, contained, but absolute. He didn't look at Reeves again immediately. He didn't need to. The silence he left behind him was doing the work. Reeves felt it settle in, heavy and suffocating, the kind of quiet that didn't give you room to think your way out. His radio crackled once more, but this time it wasn't just noise, it was hesitation. Unit 14. The voice began, then stopped, as if something had interrupted, overridden, replaced. A brief static hiss followed. Then nothing. Reeves's fingers hovered near it, uncertain now, not because he didn't know procedure, but because procedure suddenly felt irrelevant. He swallowed, jaw tightening as he tried to gather what remained of his authority. "Who are you?" he asked, the question sharper than he intended, edged with something that hadn't been there before. Not confidence. Something closer to strain. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced once toward Naomi, as if confirming something unspoken, then shifted his gaze back to Reeves. "Someone who got here before this got worse," he said. His tone was level, almost conversational, but the words carried weight. Reeves exhaled through his nose, a short, controlled breath that failed to steady him. "You're interfering with an active situation," he pushed, clinging to the frame he understood. "Step back." This time, the words didn't even pretend to land. The man took one step closer, not aggressive, not rushed, just enough to close the space Reeves had been trying to hold. "It stopped being your situation the moment you crossed a line," he said quietly. The sentence didn't rise. It didn't need to. Behind Reeves, the crowd had gone almost completely still. No murmurs now. No whispers. Just watching. Recording. Waiting. Naomi remained silent, but her presence had shifted again, not outwardly, not visibly, but in the way the moment seemed to anchor around her. Reeves felt it in the way his own footing seemed less certain, less fixed. His eyes flicked briefly to Naomi, then back to the man in front of him. "You don't even know what happened," Reeves said, though the words sounded thinner with each second. The man held his gaze. "I know enough." A beat. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Do you?" The question landed harder this time. Not because it was louder, but because it didn't need to be. Reeves didn't answer. For the first time, he didn't have one. Somewhere behind the line of vehicles, one of the other men shifted slightly, his attention moving between the crowd, the officer, the perimeter. Not scanning like patrol. Assessing. Containing. It was subtle, but it changed the shape of the space again. Reeves noticed, and something in his chest tightened further. You should walk away, the man in front of him said, his voice lowering just slightly, not softer, but more precise. Right now, you still can. The words echoed Naomi's from earlier. Not identical, but close enough to land the same way. Reeves blinked, the connection hitting him whether he wanted it to or not. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else. Something he had stepped into without understanding. What is this? Reeves asked, quieter now, the edge gone, replaced by something he couldn't quite hide anymore. The man didn't answer immediately. His gaze shifted briefly past Reeves, toward the glow of the cruiser lights reflecting off the wet pavement, then back again. This, he said slowly, is the part where you decide how much worse this becomes. The sentence settled into the air, heavier than anything that had been said so far. Behind them, the distant sirens that had once felt like backup now sounded out of place, late to something that had already escalated beyond them. Naomi's phone remained still in her hand. She hadn't looked at it again. She didn't need to, because whatever call had been missed earlier was no longer waiting. Reeves stood there, caught between instinct and consequence, between the version of himself he had walked into this night with and the reality now closing in around him. His shoulders shifted, just slightly, not a full retreat, not yet, but enough to show the crack. Enough to show that something inside him was recalculating. The man in front of him watched without pressing, without pushing, because he didn't need to. The moment was already doing that on its own. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the reach of the rain and the flashing lights, something larger than this street, larger than this night, had already been set into motion, and it was not slowing down. The rain had settled into something quieter now, not lighter, but more constant, like the night had accepted what was happening and chosen to stay with it. Naomi stood where she had been from the beginning, but something in her presence had shifted again. Not stronger, not louder, just clearer. The man in front of her remained still for a moment longer, as if giving the situation space to resolve on its own. He didn't rush her, didn't instruct her, because whatever needed to happen next wasn't his to force. It was hers. Reeves felt that shift immediately, even if he couldn't explain it. The pressure that had been pushing inward all this time suddenly changed direction. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about her, and that made it worse. Naomi looked at her phone, finally. The screen had gone dark again, but her reflection lingered faintly against it. Calm, composed, untouched by the chaos that had tried and failed to define her. She exhaled slowly, a quiet breath that seemed to settle something deeper than nerves. Then she stepped forward. Just one step. Small, controlled, but enough to change the distance. Enough to make Reeves straighten instinctively again, his body reacting before his thoughts caught up. Naomi didn't look at the man beside her. She didn't need to. Whatever he represented, whatever had arrived with him, was already understood. Instead, she looked at Reeves. Not with anger, not with accusation, but with something far more unsettling. Understanding. You should listen, she said softly. The sentence wasn't directed at the man beside her. It wasn't even fully directed at Reeves as a person. It was directed at the moment itself, at what it had become. Reeves swallowed, the movement tight, controlled, but visible. Listen to what? He asked, though his voice had lost the edge it once carried. Naomi tilted her head slightly, rain sliding down along the curve of her cheek, catching briefly on the fading mark before falling away. To the part of you that already knows this isn't right, she said. The words landed quietly, but they carried further than anything shouted could have. For a second, no one moved. The crowd didn't shift. The men who had arrived didn't step in. Even the distant sirens seemed to fall back, as if waiting. Reeves stared at her, something inside him pulling in two directions at once. Training, instinct, ego, and beneath all of it, something older, simpler, the part she was talking about. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. You don't understand how this works, he said, but the sentence didn't hold. It didn't convince even him. Naomi didn't argue, didn't push. She simply shook her head once, slow and certain. No, she said. I think I do. Because she had seen what happened when moments like this went too far. The memory wasn't loud. It never was. It lived in fragments, boots on gravel, a voice over comms, the kind of silence that followed decisions no one talked about afterward. She didn't look back at the man beside her, but the connection was there anyway, quiet and understood. Behind Reeves, One of the men who had arrived stepped forward just enough to be heard. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, his tone measured. "Do you want us to take over?" A brief pause. Then, more quietly, "We can call him." The words settled into the space like something heavier than they sounded. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around her phone. For the first time, the stillness around her shifted, not breaking, but deepening. She shook her head. "No, a beat. Not yet." The man nodded once without question and stepped back immediately, the deference absolute. Reeves caught it this time. Not just the words, the weight behind them. His gaze moved between them, slower now, more careful, like he was trying to piece together something that refused to fully reveal itself. "Who are you?" he asked again, but this time it wasn't a challenge. It was something closer to uncertainty. Naomi looked at him, rain soft against her skin, her voice steady as ever. "Someone who didn't want this to go this far," she said. Then, quieter, "Just like you." The words didn't accuse. They reflected. Reeves's jaw flexed, but no response came. Because for the first time that night, he wasn't sure who he was supposed to be answering to. Naomi glanced down at her phone again, her thumb brushing lightly against the edge of it, not unlocking it, not calling back, just acknowledging its weight. "I didn't call anyone," she said quietly. "I didn't want it to become something worse." She lifted her eyes again, meeting his. "You can still fix this." Not a warning this time. Not even a statement. An option. The kind that didn't stay open forever. Reeves stood there, the rain tapping softly against his uniform, the crowd silent, the presence behind him undeniable. Everything that had built up to this moment now pressed inward, narrowing his choices, stripping away everything unnecessary until only one thing remained. Decision. And for the first time since it began, he hesitated without trying to hide it. Not because he didn't know what to do, but because he was starting to understand what it would cost either way. The rain softened into a fine mist, barely audible now, as if the storm itself had stepped back to let something quieter take its place. The street no longer felt tense in the same sharp way. It felt heavy, like a breath being held too long. Naomi stood in front of Reeves, closer now than before, but not imposing, not threatening, just present. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but held it anyway. Reeves didn't move. Not forward. Not back. His hands hung at his sides, no longer positioned for control, no longer ready to command. Just there, waiting, for something he didn't fully understand yet. Naomi watched him, not as an opponent, not as someone to defeat, but as someone standing at a line. And she recognized that line. "You don't have to keep going," she said quietly. The words weren't sharp. They didn't cut. They settled. Reeves exhaled, the sound uneven, breaking slightly at the edge like something inside him had shifted out of rhythm. His eyes dropped for the first time, not to the ground, not in shame exactly, but in thought, in conflict. "I was just doing my job," he said, the sentence coming slower than he intended, like it had to push past something on the way out. Naomi didn't respond immediately. She let the words sit between them, let him hear them himself. "Is that what this felt like?" she asked softly. Not accusing, just asking. Reeves's jaw tightened, but there was no anger in it now. Just tension. He glanced briefly at her cheek again, the faint mark, already fading under the rain, and something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. "No," he said, after a moment. The word was quiet, honest in a way nothing else he'd said that night had been. The admission didn't echo. It didn't need to. It changed the air on its own. Behind Naomi, the men who had arrived remained still, silent, watchful, but no longer pressing. The urgency had drained from their stance, not because the situation was safe, but because it was changing, from force to choice. Naomi nodded once, not approving, not relieved, just acknowledging. "Then don't pretend it was," she said. Reeves swallowed again, slower this time. The reflex to defend, to justify, to hold on to the version of himself that made sense of what had happened. It was still there, but it was weaker now, fractured. "You don't understand," he tried again, though the words came out thinner, less certain. "People don't listen unless you make them." Naomi's eyes didn't harden. If anything, they softened, just slightly. "I listened," she said. The simplicity of it landed harder than anything else. Reeves blinked, caught off guard. Because she had. From the beginning. Even when he hadn't deserved it. Even when he raised his voice. Even when he raised his hand. The realization didn't hit all at once. It unfolded. Quietly. Inevitably. He looked past her for a second. At the people still watching, still recording, still silent in a way that felt heavier than noise. Then back at her. I didn't think, he started, then stopped. Because whatever he thought didn't matter anymore. Not here. Not now. Naomi waited. Not pushing him to finish. Not rescuing him from the moment either. Just letting him sit in it. That was the difference. She wasn't trying to win. She was letting him see. Reeves let out another breath, longer this time, his shoulders lowering just a fraction. I shouldn't have done that, he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't performative. It didn't reach for forgiveness. It simply existed. And that made it real. Naomi studied him for a moment, not judging, not measuring, just seeing. The same way she had from the start. The same way he hadn't seen her. The rain traced faint lines down both of them now, washing nothing away but softening the edges of everything else. No, she said quietly. You shouldn't have. The words weren't harsh. They didn't punish. They just confirmed what he already knew. And somehow, that made them heavier. Behind them, one of the men shifted slightly, his gaze moving across the scene again, not intervening, not interrupting, but staying present, in case the moment broke. It didn't. Not yet. Reeves nodded once, almost to himself, like he was accepting something he couldn't undo. His eyes flicked to Naomi's phone in her hand, then back to her face. You could have called someone, he said, a faint edge of something returning, not defensiveness, but awareness. You didn't. Naomi glanced down briefly, her thumb resting lightly along the edge of the device. No, she said. I didn't. A pause. Then, softer. I wanted to see if you would stop. The sentence landed with quiet precision. Not as a test. Not as a trap. But as truth. Reeves looked at her differently after that. Not as a threat. Not as a problem. But as someone who had given him something he hadn't deserved in that moment. Time. The space to choose differently. His throat tightened slightly, though he didn't look away this time. And if I didn't, he asked. Naomi met his gaze, steady as ever. Then someone else would have, she said. No drama. No weight added. Just reality. And somewhere behind that reality, something far bigger than both of them. Reeves nodded again, slower now. Because he understood what she meant. He just hadn't understood it soon enough. The street remained quiet. The crowd still watching. The men still present. But the tension had changed shape completely. It wasn't about what might happen anymore. It was about what already had. And what came after. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, the smallest movement, grounding herself back into the moment. Not as a symbol, not as a lesson, just as a person who had been standing in the rain for too long. You can still choose what happens next, she said. Reeves looked at her, really looked this time. And for the first time that night, he didn't see resistance. He saw the chance he almost lost. The silence didn't break all at once. It tightened, subtle at first, like something fragile being pulled just a little too far. Naomi stood in front of Reeves, the mist of rain barely touching her now, her breathing steady, her eyes locked on his. For a moment, it felt like the night had already decided how this would end. Then Reeves moved. His hand lifted again toward the radio at his shoulder, not fast, not aggressive, just instinct. Habit. Control reaching for something familiar. Naomi saw it immediately. So did the men behind her. One of them shifted, barely, the kind of movement most people wouldn't notice, but it was there. Ready. Naomi didn't look back, but her fingers tightened slightly around her phone. Not fear, just awareness. Reeves pressed the radio. Dispatch, he said, voice steady on the surface. I'm going to need, he stopped. The words didn't come. Because in that split second, another version of this moment opened in front of him. Cleaner. Easier. One where he controlled the narrative. Where he reduced it. Explained it away. Made it smaller than it was. His grip tightened against the device. For a second, he almost did. The silence stretched. Naomi didn't interrupt. Didn't push. She simply watched him, her voice calm when it came. Then do it. Not soft. Not harsh. Just clear. Her hand remained steady, but the tension in her fingers didn't fade. Reeves exhaled slowly, the breath catching slightly at the edge. His thumb hovered over the button again. Then he let it go. His hand dropped from the radio. I don't know how to fix it, he said. The words came out quieter than anything else that night. And heavier. Naomi let them land. Start with the truth, she said. Reeves nodded once, almost automatically. Then he turned. Not away, but outward. Toward the crowd. toward the cameras, toward every version of this moment that now existed beyond him. His chest rose and fell once. Then again, he lifted his voice, not loud, not commanding, but clear enough to carry. I used excessive force, he said. The words felt unfamiliar, like they didn't belong to him, but needed to. The crowd didn't react. They stayed still, watching, recording, waiting. She did not resist. He continued, slower now. And I was wrong. The sentence settled into the night, heavier than the rain had ever been. Naomi watched him, her expression unchanged, but something in the air shifted. Not relief, not forgiveness, something quieter, real. Reeves swallowed, his gaze dropping for just a second before lifting again. I'll report it, he added, voice lower now. Everything. Naomi nodded once. You should. No praise. No comfort. Just truth meeting truth. Reeves's hand hung at his side now, no longer searching for control, no longer reaching for something outside himself to hold on to. For the first time that night, he stood without it. And it showed. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, grounding herself again, the faint dampness on her skin catching the last traces of mist in the air. This doesn't erase it, she said. Reeves nodded. I know. A pause. Then, more quietly. But it's where it starts. Naomi held his gaze for a moment longer, measuring not his words, but the space behind them. Then she glanced past him, at the cruiser, at the lights reflecting faintly against the wet street, at the people who would carry this moment long after it ended. Her phone rested quietly in her hand. Still, silent, no longer needed. Behind her, one of the men stepped slightly closer to the other, voice low. We're clear, he said. The other gave a small nod. Not victory. Not relief. Just confirmation. Reeves remained where he was, no longer trying to reclaim the center of anything. Naomi looked back at him one last time. What you do next matters more than what you did, she said. Not as forgiveness. Not as judgment. As direction. Reeves didn't look away this time, because there was nothing left to step back into. No version of this he could rewrite. Only what came after. And for the first time that night, he understood that what came next would define who he was when this was over. The rain had almost stopped by the time the silence settled into something complete. Not empty, but full in a different way. The kind of quiet that didn't press anymore, didn't demand anything, just stayed. Naomi stood where she was. Her posture no longer held in tension. Her shoulders relaxed just enough to show the moment had shifted past confrontation. Across from her, Reeves didn't move. Not because he was frozen, but because for the first time that night, he wasn't trying to control what came next. He was letting it come. The words he had spoken still lingered in the air, not echoing, not repeating, just existing. Real. Permanent. He glanced briefly at the people around them, at the phone still raised, at the faces that had watched everything unfold. But this time, his attention didn't stay there. It returned to Naomi. Not out of obligation, not out of defense, but because something about her no longer felt like a problem he needed to solve. It felt like something he needed to understand. Naomi met his gaze, steady as ever, but softer now in a way that hadn't been there before. Not because she trusted him, not yet, but because the moment no longer required her to stand against him. Just to stand. Reeves swallowed, slower now, the movement less about holding something back and more about letting something settle. Why didn't you fight back? He asked quietly. The question wasn't sharp. It didn't accuse. It came from a place he hadn't been willing to stand in earlier. Naomi didn't answer right away. She let the question exist for a moment, like she was deciding whether it deserved more than a surface reply. Then she spoke. Because I knew you were already fighting something else, she said. The words landed gently, but they didn't feel light. Reeves blinked, caught off guard not by the tone, but by the direction. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected her to see anything beyond what he had done. What does that even mean? He asked, a faint edge of confusion slipping through. Naomi tilted her head slightly, studying him, not as an officer, not as someone who had hurt her, but as a person standing in front of her now. It means this wasn't really about me, she said. Reeves let out a quiet breath, almost a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. I hit you, he said. How is that not about you? Naomi didn't flinch at the words, didn't soften them. She let them stay exactly as they were. Because you decided who I was before you ever spoke to me, she said. And then you reacted to that version. The sentence didn't rise. It didn't accuse. It clarified. Reeves's jaw tightened slightly, but not in anger. In recognition. Because somewhere beneath everything else, he knew that was true. He just hadn't wanted to see it that way. Naomi took a small breath, the kind that grounded rather than filled. People do that, she continued quietly. It's easier than stopping long. Enough to ask who someone actually is. The street remained still around them, the last drops of rain catching faint light before disappearing into the pavement. Reeves shifted his weight slightly, the movement subtle, like his body was adjusting to something his mind was still catching up to. And you just let it happen? He asked. Naomi shook her head once. No, she said. I gave you time to see it. The difference settled between them, quiet but undeniable. Reeves looked at her differently after that, not just because of what she said, but because of what it meant. She hadn't been passive. She hadn't been weak. She had been choosing. Every second. Every response. Or lack of one. His gaze dropped briefly to her cheek again, the mark now barely visible, softened by time and rain. That's not fair, he said, though there was no force behind it. You gave me a chance I didn't deserve. Naomi didn't disagree. She didn't need to. Maybe, she said. But that doesn't make it the wrong thing to do. Reeves exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him heavier than before, but also clearer. Because for the first time, the moment wasn't just about what he had done. It was about what she had chosen not to do. And that felt bigger. Behind her, the men who had arrived remained where they were, their presence no longer pressing into the scene, but still there, steady, like a boundary that didn't need to move to exist. Reeves noticed them again, but differently this time. Not as a threat, as context, as something connected to her, not separate from her. They would have stepped in, he said quietly, almost to himself. Naomi followed his glance briefly, then back to him. Yes, she said. They would have. A pause. Then, softer. But I wanted to know if you would. The words didn't land like pressure. They landed like truth. Reeves nodded once, slower than before. Because now he understood what that meant. This wasn't just about accountability. It was about choice. About who he was when no one forced him to be anything else. He looked at her again. Really looked this time. Not at her uniform. Not at the situation. Not at the moment. But at her. You still gave me that, he said. Naomi didn't respond immediately. She let the weight of that sit where it needed to. Then she nodded once. Because it matters, she said. Simple. Direct. Final. Reeves held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, not in avoidance, but in thought. In processing something that didn't come with a quick answer. The street around them had begun to breathe again, small movements returning, quiet conversations starting at the edges, but the center, the space between them, remained still. Naomi shifted slightly, her body easing out of the rigid stillness it had held for so long, not because the moment was over, but because it had changed shape completely. You don't have to be who you were 5 minutes ago, she said quietly. Reeves let out a breath, almost a half laugh again, but this time softer. Less defensive. Feels like I already was, he admitted. Naomi's expression didn't change much, but something in it warmed just slightly. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something closer to understanding. Then don't be him again, she said. The sentence didn't echo. It didn't need to. It stayed exactly where it was meant to, between them. And for the first time that night, Reeves didn't feel like he was standing against something. He felt like he was standing at the beginning of something else. The street hadn't returned to normal. It only pretended to. The crowd had thinned at the edges, but not completely. Phones were still raised, though lower now, like people weren't sure if the moment was over or just changing shape again. The mist in the air caught the flashing lights from the cruiser, turning everything slightly blurred, slightly unreal. Naomi stood where she was, no longer at the center of tension, but still the center of truth. Reeves remained a few steps away, his posture no longer rigid, his presence quieter, but not smaller. Just different. For a brief moment, it felt like the night had exhaled. Then the sound came. Tires on wet pavement, faster this time. Not controlled. Not quiet. A police SUV turned the corner too sharply, stopping with a short, aggressive halt near the scene. Doors opened immediately. No pause. No silence. A different kind of presence stepped out. Authority, but louder. A senior officer moved forward quickly, eyes scanning, taking in the crowd, the cameras, the unfamiliar men near Naomi, and finally Reeves. What the hell is going on here? His voice cut through the space, sharp and impatient. The calm that had settled didn't disappear, but it shifted, tightened again, tested. Reeves felt it instantly. The old reflex, the one that reached for alignment, for hierarchy, for someone above him to define what this moment was, pulled at him again. Stronger than before. Easier than before. The senior officer stopped in front of him. "Reeves," he said, voice lower now, but no less forceful. "Talk to me." A pause. The kind that doesn't last long, but holds everything. Naomi didn't move. The men behind her didn't step in. They watched. Because this was the real test. Not when things were uncertain, but when the system returned and offered him a way out. Reeves glanced briefly at Naomi. Just a second, but enough. Then back at the man in front of him. "I used excessive force," he said. The words came faster this time. Not rushed, but without hesitation. The senior officer frowned immediately. "What?" Reeves held his ground. "She didn't resist," he continued. "And I struck her. That was my decision." The air shifted again, but not like before. This wasn't quiet realization. This was friction. The senior officer looked past him, at Naomi, at the faint mark on her cheek, then back again. "Reeves," he said, voice tightening. "You don't say that out loud. Not like this. Not here." The sentence landed hard. Not because it was loud, but because it revealed something else. Something Naomi had already known. Reeves felt it too. The difference between truth and what was usually done with it. His jaw flexed slightly, but he didn't look away. "It already is out loud," he said, nodding slightly toward the phone still recording. The senior officer followed the motion, irritation flashing briefly across his face. "Then you control it," he snapped. "You don't hand it to them." There it was. The easier version. Again. Cleaner. Safer. Familiar. Reeves felt the weight of it settle in his chest. The version of this where he stepped back into. The system. Let it handle things. Let it shrink what happened into something manageable. Something survivable. His fingers twitched slightly at his side. The old instinct didn't disappear. It waited. Naomi watched him. Not stepping in. Not speaking. Because she had already done that part. This one had to be his. The senior officer leaned in slightly, voice lower now. "We can fix this," he said. "But not if you start talking like that." A beat. Reeves inhaled slowly. The sound of it quiet, but steady. Then he straightened. Not into authority. Into something else. "It doesn't need to be fixed," he said. The words were calm. But final. The senior officer stared at him, caught between confusion and frustration. "Excuse me." Reeves didn't raise his voice. Didn't push. "It needs to be reported," he said. Exactly as it happened. The silence that followed was different. Not soft. Not reflective. Tense. Because this wasn't about understanding anymore. This was about resistance. The senior officer's expression hardened slightly. "You're making a mistake," he said. Reeves shook his head once. "No," he replied. "I already made one." The sentence didn't echo. It settled. Heavy. Real. Behind Naomi, one of the men shifted just slightly. Not forward, not intervening, but present. Ready. The balance held. Naomi remained still, her eyes on Reeves. Not with expectation, not with pressure, but with something quieter. Recognition. Because this was the moment that mattered more than anything before it. Not the slap. Not the confession. This. Reeves exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. Not because the situation had become easier, but because he had stopped trying to make it that way. "I'll file the report," he said. "And I'll include everything." The senior officer didn't respond immediately. His gaze lingered, measuring, calculating, but something in the moment had already slipped past him. The decision had been made, and it wasn't his. Naomi watched the exchange without moving, the mist catching faint light around her, her phone still resting quietly in her hand. She didn't need to say anything. She had already done enough. Reeves looked at her again, just briefly, not for approval, not for forgiveness, but to acknowledge something unspoken between them. Then he turned back, because what came next wasn't about her anymore. It was about him standing inside the choice he had made, and not stepping out of it when it became harder. The tension didn't snap. It softened, slowly, unevenly, like something that had been pulled too tight finally being allowed to breathe again. The senior officer stood there, his authority still present but no longer dominant, his options narrowing in ways he hadn't expected when he stepped out of the vehicle. Reeves remained where he was, shoulders squared but no longer rigid, The decision already made and, more importantly, held. Naomi watched both of them, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged. The moment no longer belonged to conflict. It belonged to choice. And now, it belonged to her. The man beside her shifted slightly, just enough to be heard if needed. "We can still make the call," he said quietly. Not a suggestion, not pressure, just a reminder. Naomi didn't look at him right away. Her eyes stayed on Reeves, studying not what he had done, but what he was doing now. Standing, not backing down, not rewriting, not hiding. The rain had almost completely stopped, leaving the street damp and reflective. Every light stretched thin across the pavement like a memory that refused to disappear. "No," Naomi said softly. The word wasn't hesitant. It wasn't uncertain. It was decided. The man beside her nodded once, immediately still again, the option gone as quickly as it had been offered. The senior officer's eyes narrowed slightly. "Call?" he repeated, the word catching his attention. But no one answered him, because the meaning of that word didn't belong to him. Naomi took a small step forward. Not toward power, not toward control, just toward the space that had been left open. Reeves noticed. He didn't move, didn't brace. He simply watched her, the same way she had watched him earlier. Without assumption, without defense, Naomi stopped a few feet in front of him, close enough that her voice didn't need to rise. "You didn't have to do that," she said. The sentence echoed earlier words, but it carried something different now. Not warning, not tension, recognition. Reeves let out a slow breath, his gaze steady. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." There was no hesitation this time. No searching, just truth. Naomi held his eyes for a moment longer, as if weighing something that couldn't be measured easily. Behind her, the presence of the men who had arrived remained unchanged, but it no longer pressed into the moment. It simply existed, waiting, ready, but no longer needed. The senior officer shifted his stance, impatience flickering again. "If there's something that needs to be handled," he said, voice controlled but edged, "we'll handle it." Naomi turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him. Her expression didn't harden. It didn't soften either. It simply was. "It is being handled," she said. Calm. Final. The words didn't challenge him. They ended the conversation. Reeves watched that exchange, something settling deeper inside him. Not relief, not pride, something closer to understanding. This wasn't about power stepping in. It wasn't about force correcting force. It was about something else entirely. Naomi looked back at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them held everything that had happened, every decision, every mistake, every chance given and taken. Then she exhaled, the smallest release of tension finally leaving her shoulders. "I'm not going to make that call," she said. Reeves didn't ask which call. He already knew. The weight of it was clear in the way she said it, the way she chose it. "You could," he said, not as a question, but as a recognition. Naomi nodded once. "I could." A pause. Then, quieter. But that wouldn't change anything about what already happened. The truth of it settled in, simple and unshaken. Reeves looked down for a second, then back up again, his expression different now. Not guarded, not defensive, just open in a way it hadn't been before. "It would change what happens to me," he said. Naomi didn't deny that. "Yes," she said. "It would." The honesty didn't cut. It clarified. The senior officer watched the exchange carefully now, his earlier confidence replaced with something more cautious. Because whatever this was, it wasn't something he could step into and control. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, grounding herself again, her phone still resting quietly in her hand. "But that's not why I'm here," she continued. Reeves frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in focus. "Listening." "Then why didn't you?" he asked. Naomi met his gaze fully now. "Because I wanted to see if you could stop," she said. The same truth as before, but deeper now, more complete. "And you did." The words didn't sound like praise. They sounded like conclusion. Reeves felt that settle in his chest, heavier than anything else that night. Not because it excused him, but because it didn't. It acknowledged what he had done, and what he had chosen after. Both. Naomi held his gaze for one more second, then gave the slightest nod. Not forgiveness. Not closure. Something quieter. Acceptance of what this moment had become. "What happens next is yours," she said. Reeves nodded slowly. "I know." And for the first time, it didn't sound like something he was bracing for. It sounded like something he was ready to face. The street remained still around them, the last of the tension dissolving into something calmer, something more human. Behind Naomi, the men who had arrived didn't move, but their presence no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a boundary that had been respected. Naomi turned slightly, her body easing out of the center of the moment, not retreating, but stepping back into herself. She had done what she came to do, not by force, not by power, but by choosing not to use it. And that choice had changed everything. The street didn't return to noise. It returned to breath. Slow, uneven, human. The last trace of rain clung to the pavement, catching light in thin reflections that stretched and broke with every small movement around them. Naomi stood slightly off-center now, no longer holding the moment in place, just existing within it. The tension that had once wrapped tight around her shoulders had loosened, not completely gone, but no longer necessary. Reeves remained where he was, but something about him had changed in a way that no uniform could hide. He didn't look like someone in control anymore. He looked like someone aware. A second police unit had arrived quietly in the background, slower this time, without urgency, without the sharp edge of intervention. The senior officer exchanged a few low words with them, his tone controlled but different now, less certain, more measured. The system had adjusted, not collapsed, but shifted. Reeves glanced toward them briefly, then back at Naomi. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. "I'll make the report tonight," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't carry authority. It carried intention. Naomi nodded once. Good. No praise. No softness added to it. Just acknowledgement. But something about the way she said it felt steady. Real. Reeves hesitated for a second, then stepped forward, not closing the distance entirely, but enough to make the space between them feel intentional. "I don't expect anything from you," he added. "Not forgiveness. Not anything." The words came slower now, like he was choosing them instead of reacting with them. Naomi watched him, her expression quiet, unreadable for a moment. Then, something shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but enough. "That's not how this works," she said softly. The same words he had said earlier, but different now. Entirely. Reeves let out a small breath, something almost like a broken laugh, but softer, more honest. "Yeah," he said. "I figured that out too late." Naomi tilted her head slightly, studying him again. Not the officer, not the authority, but the person standing there now. "You figured it out," she said. "That's not nothing." The sentence didn't excuse him. It didn't erase anything, but it gave shape to something else. Something forward. Reeves nodded once, slower this time, because he understood what she meant. Not redemption. Not yet. But direction. Behind Naomi, one of the men stepped closer, not interrupting, just close enough to be heard. "We should move," he said quietly. "This is done." Naomi didn't respond immediately. Her gaze stayed on Reeves for one more second, like she was confirming something unseen. Then she nodded. "Yeah," she said softly. "It is." She shifted her weight, finally, stepping back, not retreating, not leaving in defeat, but stepping out of the center she had never tried to hold. The men moved with her, not around her, not shielding her, just present, aligned. The balance of power that had once been invisible was now unmistakable, but it didn't need to be used. That was the difference. Reeves watched her step away, something settling deeper in his chest. Not regret alone, not relief, but something heavier, something quieter. "Wait," he said, before he could stop himself. Naomi paused, not turning fully, just enough to listen. Reeves swallowed, the motion slower now, more deliberate. "You said you wanted to see if I would stop," he said. "If I would choose differently." Naomi turned slightly more, her eyes meeting his again. "Yes." A beat. Reeves nodded once. Then, "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they didn't come easy. Naomi held his gaze for a moment, the silence between them no longer tense, no longer heavy, just full. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just don't forget this." The sentence landed deeper than anything else that night, because it wasn't about her. It was about what he would carry forward. Reeves nodded again. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just acceptance. Naomi turned fully now, beginning to walk away, her steps quiet against the damp pavement. The men followed, not leading, not surrounding, just there. As they moved past the line of vehicles, past the fading crowd, past the place where everything had changed. The street seemed to shift with them, not returning to what it was, becoming something else. Reeves remained where he stood, watching until they were no longer the center of his view, until they blended into the rest of the night. The senior officer approached again, slower this time. "You're going to have to answer for this," he said. Reeves didn't look at him immediately. When he did, his expression wasn't defensive. It wasn't afraid. "I know," he said, and for the first time, that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like something earned. The senior officer studied him for a second, then gave a short nod, not approving, not agreeing, just acknowledging that something had shifted, in a way he couldn't reverse. The street settled fully now, the last echoes of the moment dissolving into memory. Reeves stood alone for a second longer, the damp air cool against his skin, the weight of what had happened no longer pressing, but present. And for the first time that night, he didn't reach for his radio. He didn't reach for control. He just stood there, breathing, carrying it. Because what came next wasn't about fixing anything. It was about becoming someone who wouldn't need to. The street didn't go back to what it was. It simply moved on. Slowly, carefully, like something had happened there that no one could quite name, but no one would forget either. The crowd thinned in fragments, phones lowering one by one, voices returning in low, uncertain tones, as if speaking too loudly might pull the moment back into focus. Naomi walked without looking back, her steps steady against the damp pavement, reflections of streetlights stretching and breaking beneath her feet. The men beside her didn't speak, didn't guide, didn't shield. They didn't need to. Their presence, once heavy with potential, now felt lighter, contained, and used, chosen against. She had decided that, and that decision lingered in the air behind her like something invisible but permanent. For a second, just a second, her reflection remained in the water behind her. Then it disappeared. Behind them, Reeves remained where he was, long after the last cluster of onlookers dissolved into the night. The weight of what had happened hadn't disappeared. It had changed shape. It no longer pressed against him from the outside. It settled inside him, quiet and undeniable. He looked down at the thin layer of water beneath his boots, the reflection of red and blue lights distorting across the surface, shifting with every small ripple. Then he looked up again. And this time, he didn't look away, because what he saw wasn't something to control anymore. It was something to carry. His hand lifted slightly, brushing against the radio at his shoulder. He paused. For a moment. Then he turned it off. Not out of defiance. Not out of anger. But because for the first time that night, he didn't need it. Somewhere behind him, the system was already rebuilding itself. Voices. Reports. Movement. But Reeves didn't turn. Not yet. Because something more important had just happened, and he wasn't going to step past it this time. A few yards away, near the line of black vehicles, one of the men paused before getting in. His phone vibrated once. He glanced down, answered immediately. "Sir." His voice was low, controlled, the kind that didn't carry, but didn't need to. A pause. The rain barely touched the moment anymore. Then, quietly, "Yes, she's safe." The words settled into the silence like something final. He listened for another second, then straightened slightly. Not into attention, into respect. "Understood." Another pause. This one shorter. "No, sir." It didn't escalate. His eyes flicked once toward Naomi's figure disappearing into the night. She handled it. Silence. Then the line went dead. No raised voice. No threats. No commands repeated. Just control. Absolute. The man lowered the phone slowly. For a fraction of a second, before the screen dimmed, something was visible. A name. Colonel Hayes. And beneath it, one line of identification. Delta Force Command. Not the kind of unit that showed up in reports. The kind that ended situations before they ever became public. The screen went black. The man said nothing. Didn't explain. Didn't look back. He simply stepped into the vehicle. The door closed softly. One by one, the black SUVs pulled away. No sirens, no lights, no urgency. Just quiet movement disappearing into the night like they had never needed to be there at all. Because they hadn't. Back on the street, Reeves stood alone now. No crowd. No noise. Just the faint reflection of what had happened still lingering in the wet pavement beneath him. He didn't know the name. He didn't know the rank. He didn't know how close he had come to something far beyond his understanding. But somewhere deep inside, he felt it. The line. He looked down once more at the reflection of the streetlights, then back up. And for the first time that night, there was no confusion in his eyes. No anger. No urgency. Just clarity. Naomi didn't change the system that night. She didn't need to. She changed. Something smaller. Quieter. Harder. She changed the space between power and choice. And somewhere in the silence she left behind, without raising her voice, without calling for help, without ever needing the power that stood behind her, she made someone remember what it felt like to be human. He mocked her for not fighting back. But in the end, she didn't need to. Because the moment he chose to stop was the moment she won.